The end of a 5-year relationship didn't arrive with a thunderous crash, but with the quiet, deliberate click of the living room door. It was a Tuesday, the kind of unremarkable Tuesday that usually dissolved into a shared dinner and the low hum of the television. But last Tuesday was different. My girlfriend Tina ended our relationship. We lived together in a house that I had bought 2 years before she moved in, a fact that used to be a point of shared pride, but now felt like a stark, legal reality. She had the decency to do it face to face, but as I would soon learn, decency was a finite resource she had already expended. She guided me to the sofa, the one we'd picked out together, its worn leather a testament to thousands of hours of shared life. Now it felt like a defendant's bench. She sat opposite me in the armchair, posture perfect, hands clasped in her lap. It was a pose of curated solemnity. She had rehearsed this. "David," she began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of gentle regret. "I need you to listen, really listen." I said nothing. I just watched her. In my line of work as a systems architect, I've learned that you can understand the most complex structures by observing their inputs and outputs, by tracing the flow of information. Right now, I was tracing the flow of 5 years of my life as it was being rerouted to a dead end. She told me she loved me, but as a person, a friend. The qualifier hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She wasn't in love with me anymore. She spoke of a feeling, a gnawing sense that something was missing. A phrase so cliché it felt like it had been lifted from a bad daytime movie. This was the preamble, the soft, predictable padding before the killing blow. And then she delivered it. "I'm just not attracted to you anymore. David." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes, which I once knew better than my own reflection, were now filled with a sort of clinical pity, the look a doctor gives you before delivering a terminal diagnosis. "I've done a lot of thinking," she continued, her voice gaining a strange, almost evangelical fervor. "And I've realized what I need, what I've been missing. I need a real alpha, someone who takes charge, a true leader. Alpha." The word landed in the quiet room with the thud of a dropped textbook. It's a term I've always associated with amateur evolutionary psychology and pick-up artist forums, a caricature of masculinity defined by chest thumping and volume, not substance. In the world of engineering, in the world of building complex functional systems, peacocks don't build bridges, they just display feathers. The insult was so direct, so breathtakingly condescending, that it bypassed my emotional circuits entirely. Anger felt like an illogical response. Defensiveness, a waste of energy. What I felt instead was a profound, chilling clarity. It was the same feeling I get when I finally isolate a critical bug in millions of lines of code. The problem, which had been a nebulous sense of unease for months, suddenly had a name and a clear definition. The system of our relationship hadn't just failed. It had been built on a fundamentally flawed premise. I thought the premise was mutual respect for our differing natures. I was wrong. The premise for her was a performance I was unwilling and unable to give. I've always been a quiet person. I don't feel the need to be the loudest voice in the room. I don't dominate conversations with anecdotes or brag about my achievements. My confidence isn't worn like a flashy suit. It's embedded in the integrity of my work. I lead not by decree but by example, by being the one who has the answer when things fall apart, by building frameworks that are so robust and elegant that they make everyone else's job easier. I solve problems. I build things that work. I had operated for 5 years under the assumption that she not only understood this about me, but that she valued it, that she saw the quiet strength in the architect, the builder. How utterly, devastatingly wrong I was. In her eyes, my quiet confidence was weakness. My methodical nature was a lack of ambition. My refusal to engage in corporate posturing was a failure to lead. I didn't argue. I didn't beg or raise my voice. I just looked at her, at this woman who was suddenly a stranger. And I waited. I knew this wasn't the complete story. A declaration like this is never the cause. It is the consequence. There was another variable in the equation, another component in the system that she hadn't declared yet. My silence was a vacuum, and her narrative rushed to fill it. She took it as an invitation to confess or perhaps to boast. She told me she had been getting close to someone else, a man from our company. His name was Chad. For context, Tina, Chad, and I all work at the same large engineering firm, a sprawling ecosystem of brilliant minds, ambitious climbers, and everyone in between. Our roles form a natural, if sometimes tense, triangle. I am a senior systems architect. I exist in the logical, foundational layer of the company, designing the digital backbones for our most complex projects. I build the engines. Tina is a project manager. She operates on the logistical plane, coordinating timelines, resources, and people. She directs the traffic. And Chad is a senior sales strategist. He lives on the surface, the glossy, client-facing layer where perception is reality. He sells the car, often without a complete understanding of the engine I've built. We work in adjacent spheres, our orbits occasionally intersecting on large-scale initiatives. But I had never considered him a significant factor in my life. Until now, Chad is precisely the man you picture when you hear the word alpha used without a trace of irony. He's a walking collection of corporate tropes. He's loud in meetings, his confidence so overt it bleeds into arrogance. He wears suits that are just a little too shiny, his tie knots a little too thick. His LinkedIn profile is a monument to hustle culture, filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and blue sky thinking. He is a master of the slick presentation, a virtuoso of the PowerPoint deck. His charisma is a tangible force field. He can command a room, charm a client, and sell a vision with breathtaking skill. The substance of that vision, however, has always seemed questionable to me. From my architect's perspective, his plans are like beautiful architectural renderings of a building with no structural support. They look incredible on paper, but they ignore the fundamental laws of physics. More than once, my team had been forced to work through the night to salvage a project, creating complex, last-minute workarounds because Chad's strategy had promised a feature our core system simply could not support. He would sell the dream, get his commission, and move on, while my team was left to quietly plumb the nightmare. As Tina spoke, her voice wasn't just confessional, it was triumphant. She talked about Chad's ambition and his unstoppable drive as if these were newly discovered forces of nature. And then, she revealed the true engine of her betrayal. For the last 2 months, a new, major position had been created at the company, Director of Strategic Integration. It was a role born of necessity, a high-level leadership position designed to finally bridge the massive, often dysfunctional gap between the deep tech teams, the project managers, and the sales strategists. The new director would be the ultimate organizational architect, the person with the authority to align the builders, the planners, and the sellers into a single, cohesive unit. The director would, in effect, become the boss of all 3 of our departments. With a smug sense of excitement that was genuinely unsettling, Tina told me that Chad was the leading candidate. It was, she said, practically a done deal. And then she admitted her own role in his ascension. She confessed that for weeks, she had been secretly helping him craft his proposals. She had been feeding him inside information, metrics from ongoing projects, confidential team resource allocations, even my own team's private assessments of technical limitations. She was giving him the blueprints to the engine room so he could sound like he understood how it all worked. She was helping him fake the very substance he lacked. She was completely, utterly invested in his success. She wasn't just falling for a new man, she was executing a merger. In her mind, his promotion was their launchpad. They would be the new power couple of the office, a dynamic duo of strategy and execution. As she laid all of this out, from her emotional dissatisfaction to her calculated professional betrayal, I just sat there. I watched her face, animated with the thrill of her grand design. She wasn't just leaving a relationship she found unfulfilling. She was trading up. She saw me as a stable, reliable stock that had plateaued, and she was cashing out to invest in a high-risk, high-reward startup named Chad. The entire sordid, pathetic business plan was laid bare on the worn leather of our sofa. When she was finally done, after she had thoroughly dismantled our 5 years together and justified her treachery as a form of self-actualization, she looked at me, expecting, what? Tears, rage, a pathetic plea to reconsider. She had laid out a complex problem statement, and I, the systems architect, had processed the data. The conclusion was self-evident. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the cold, clarifying rage that was now cementing itself in my gut. I understand, I said. Tina seemed a little surprised by my lack of emotion. A man she had just emotionally eviscerated was supposed to be a wreck, a chaotic system in full collapse. My calmness was an anomaly she couldn't compute. She took it as acceptance, a quiet capitulation. I'll need a week or 2 to find a new place, she said, her tone already shifting from executioner to logistical planner. I just nodded, my mind already miles away, processing a different, far more significant set of variables. She stood up, the meeting adjourned in her mind, and walked out of the living room, leaving me alone with the ghost of our 5 years together. She thought she held all the cards. She thought she had just explained the entire game to me. She was wrong. She had only revealed her own hand, blissfully unaware of the ace I had been holding, one I had never even intended to play. Here's what she did not know. Here is the critical piece of data she was missing from her strategic calculations. While she and Chad were plotting his meteoric rise, whispering in conference rooms and crafting their vision of a corporate dynasty, senior management had been having serious doubts about him. They saw precisely what I saw: a lot of flash, a mountain of charisma, but a terrifyingly shallow foundation. In a company built on engineering excellence, Chad was a marketing campaign. His strategies, so compelling on a PowerPoint slide, consistently and dangerously ignored the critical technical limitations that were the bedrock of our business. He was a known quantity to my department. We called the aftermath of his initiatives Chadfall, the inevitable scramble to patch, recode, and manage the client's expectations when his grand promises collided with reality. It was costing the company money and, more importantly, it was burning out its most valuable technical talent. Because of this, about a month ago, the senior vice president of product, a man named Marcus Thorne, had quietly summoned me to his office. Marcus is an engineer's engineer. He'd started with the company 30 years ago as a junior programmer and had coded his way to the top floor. He had a reputation for being gruff, impatient with corporate jargon, and possessing an almost supernatural ability to sniff out bullshit. He still kept a whiteboard in his expansive office, and it was covered not with sales projections, but with complex system diagrams. He saw the company not as a balance sheet, but as an intricate machine, and he knew every gear and piston. He gestured for me to close the door, and for 20 minutes, he laid out the company's core problem. "We've got a disconnect, David," he'd said, skipping the pleasantries. "The sales guys are writing checks the technology can't cash. We're selling futures based on sizzle, and your people are getting burned trying to invent the steak overnight. It's unsustainable." He never mentioned Chad by name, but he didn't have to. He was describing Chad's entire operational philosophy. Then he looked at me, his gaze direct and analytical. "We're creating a new director-level role to fix this. Someone to own the bridge between product, sales, and project management. Someone who can tell the sales guys no and explain why in terms they can't argue with." He paused, leaning back in his chair. "The obvious choice is to promote a hotshot from sales, someone who talks their talk. But I think that's a mistake. I think we need a builder. We need an architect." He offered me the position. Director of Strategic Integration. He told me that while I wasn't the obvious political choice, I was the only candidate who truly, fundamentally understood how all the pieces of the company actually fit together. "I don't need another salesman, David," he had said. "I need a leader who can deliver results, not just promises." I was stunned. It was a career trajectory I had never once considered for myself. I was hesitant, and I told him so. I enjoy the tangible work, the clean logic of designing a system. I find deep, profound satisfaction in creating something from nothing, in solving a complex puzzle and seeing it work flawlessly. I'm an architect, a builder. I wasn't sure I wanted to trade my blueprints for budgets, my code for corporate politics. That world was messy, governed by emotion and ego, the very things I sought to eliminate in my own work. I told Marcus I needed some time to consider it. The truth is, I was deeply conflicted. It was the classic craftsman's dilemma. Do you continue to perfect your craft, or do you step back to manage the workshop? I didn't mention a word of it to Tina. Our relationship was already feeling strained, a low-grade hum of static beneath all our conversations. I knew how she would see my hesitation. She wouldn't see a man weighing his professional passions against a new path. She would see a lack of ambition. She would see weakness. My desire to think things through, to analyze the problem from all angles before committing, was the very quality she was beginning to despise in me. So I kept it to myself, a silent, complex variable in an already failing equation. Sitting there in the silence of a home that was no longer ours, the last of my hesitation vanished. It didn't just fade, it was burned away by the acid of her words. Her speech, a meticulously crafted monument to my inadequacy, had been intended to break me. Instead, it built me into something new. Every condescending phrase, every drop of pity, every ounce of her misguided worship of Chad's hollow bravado became the fuel for a decision I hadn't realized I was ready to make. The conflict I'd felt, the craftsman versus the manager, passion versus politics, was a luxury I could no longer afford. It was a theoretical debate from a life I was no longer living. My life now had a new, clarifying premise. I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by the person who should have known me best. Turning down the promotion now would be a tacit agreement with her verdict. It would validate her entire twisted narrative. To her, and in some ways to myself, it would be an admission of the weakness she accused me of, a confirmation that I lacked the ambition and the steel to take charge. My thoughtful consideration would be remembered as cowardly indecision. My love for my craft would be framed as a fear of responsibility. She had drawn a line in the sand, defining alpha on her own shallow terms. To retreat now, to remain the quiet builder in the background, was to let her definitions stand, to let her win the argument about the very essence of my character. Accepting the promotion was the only move I had left. It was no longer about a career path. It wasn't about money or a corner office. It was about self-respect. It was about rewriting the narrative not for her, but for myself. She wanted an alpha. Fine. I would show her what real leadership looked like. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The world felt different, sharper. The decision had settled within me, a core of cold, hard certainty. I went through my morning routine with a deliberate, focused calm. When I shaved, I looked at my own reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the quiet, accommodating boyfriend. I saw a man who had been handed a challenge. I saw a director. When I got to the office, I didn't go to my desk. I didn't open my email. I walked directly to the executive suite on the top floor, the quiet, carpeted realm of senior management. I nodded at Marcus's assistant and walked to his door. It was open. He was on the phone, but he saw me, and his eyebrows raised in surprise. He held up a finger, quickly finished his call, and hung up. "David," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good to see you. What's on your mind? Coffee?" He gestured to the machine in the corner of his office. I shook my head and remained standing. I wanted this to be clear, decisive. "Marcus," I replied, my voice steady, "I've considered your offer. Regarding the Director of Strategic Integration position, if it's still on the table, I accept." A huge smile of pure, unadulterated relief spread across his face. It wasn't just polite pleasure. It was the look of a man who had just seen his last-ditch plan pay off. "David!" he boomed, standing up and extending a hand across his large oak desk. "That's the best news I've heard all month." He shook my hand firmly, his grip like iron. It felt less like a greeting and more like a pact. "We were hoping you'd come around," he admitted, still beaming. Frankly, the alternative was giving me heartburn. He didn't need to say the name. We both knew he meant Chad. "The official announcement will go out in a company-wide email at 9 a.m. sharp on Monday morning. Until then, not a word. Welcome aboard, Director." I walked out of his office and back towards the main floor, the title echoing in my mind. Director. Nothing had physically changed, but everything was different. I was moving through the same space, past the same people, but I was viewing it all through a new lens, from a higher altitude. I was no longer just responsible for the integrity of the code. I was now responsible for the integrity of the entire strategy. My quiet world of logic and order was about to collide with the messy, political world of sales and management. And I felt ready. The path was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was wait for Monday morning. I spent the rest of that Friday in a state of deep, resonant focus. It was as if my entire perception of the office had sharpened. The low-level chatter, the hum of the servers, the political currents that flowed through the cubicles. I was aware of it all, but from a new, detached perspective. I was no longer a participant in the daily grind. I was an observer, an architect studying the existing structure before taking command of its redesign. I completed my outstanding tasks with methodical precision, archiving old project files and leaving clean, well-documented code for the person who would eventually take over my role. I was closing a chapter of my own life. When I got home, the evidence of Tina's new chapter was strewn across the living room in the form of cardboard boxes and packing tape. She was there, humming a cheerful, tuneless melody as she wrapped coffee mugs in newspaper. She looked up when I came in, and her smile was bright and pitying. "There you are," she said, as if I were a stray who had wandered back. "Big weekend of packing for me." She seemed to be floating, buoyed by the certainty of her brilliant future. She told me, with an almost giddy excitement, that she and Chad were going to have a celebratory dinner on Monday night, after the big announcement, a fancy steakhouse downtown. "You know, to kick things off right," she explained, as though I were a close friend she was sharing good news with. "Chad's already talking about the changes he's going to make. He's a real visionary, David. It's going to be incredible to watch." I simply nodded, placing my briefcase by the door. "That's nice," I said, my voice a flat, unreadable surface. My lack of reaction didn't seem to register. She was so absorbed in her own triumphant narrative that my role in it had been reduced to that of a silent, melancholic extra. Then came the moment that I will remember with perfect clarity for the rest of my life. She walked over to me, wiping dust from her hands onto her jeans. She had the audacity to put her hand on my shoulder and pat it, a gesture one might give to a child or a dog. "Listen, don't worry about things here at work," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of magnanimous concern. "I've already spoken to Chad. Once he's director, he's going to make sure you're taken care of. He's going to assign you to some of the most important new projects." She leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "He really values your technical skills. He says you're the best architect in the company, and he needs a guy like you in the engine room to make his visions a reality." The sheer layered condescension of that statement was a masterpiece. In one breath, she was soothing the man she'd discarded, assuring me that my new, more powerful replacement would find a use for my limited talents. She was casting me as the loyal, competent subordinate to her and Chad's glorious reign. She was defining my future for me, a future of service to the very man who had taken my place. I just looked at her, at the sincere, misguided pity in her eyes. She actually believed she was being kind. "That's thoughtful of you," I said. And in that moment I felt a strange sense of peace. Any lingering doubt, any microscopic grain of sentimentality I might have held for our shared past was scoured away. The weekend was a quiet, surreal exercise in cohabitation. We were two strangers orbiting the silent center of a life that had already ended. I helped her tape up a few boxes, my movements efficient and detached. On Saturday afternoon, while she was out meeting a prospective landlord, I systematically moved all of her belongings from the master bedroom into the guest room down the hall. I folded her clothes from the drawers and placed them in neat piles on the spare bed. I collected her toiletries from the bathroom and lined them up on the guest room vanity. It was not a passionate or angry act. It was a logistical one, an act of system administration. I was revoking her access, clearing her data from the main server, and migrating it to a temporary, isolated partition. When she came home, she saw the change and simply nodded. "Thanks," she said, her voice distant. "I guess you need your space." She thought it was me retreating, licking my wounds. She was blissfully unaware that it was an eviction notice. She had no idea that an email was sitting on a company server, a digital time bomb, scheduled to detonate in every single employee's inbox at precisely 9 a.m. on Monday morning. She thought she was hitching her wagon to a rising star. She had no idea she was about to be introduced to her new boss. Monday morning arrived with the strange, heavy sense of inevitability that precedes a storm. The atmosphere in the house was thick with a tense, awkward silence that even the mundane sounds of the coffee maker and the shower couldn't penetrate. We moved around each other like ghosts, our shared history a landscape of invisible obstacles. Tina, however, seemed to be floating on a cloud of smug satisfaction, completely insulated from the tension. She was more talkative than she had been in months, chattering about the dinner reservations she'd confirmed with Chad and the colour of the new dress she was planning to wear. She was performing the role of a woman on the cusp of a great victory. As we were getting ready for work, she stood in the doorway of the bathroom while I was shaving, a towel wrapped around her head like a turban. She leaned against the frame, watching my reflection in the mirror, and offered me one final piece of unsolicited, magnanimous advice. "You know, David," she started, her tone that of a kindly mentor, dripping with fake concern. "You're a great architect, probably the best in the company, but you just don't have that leadership spark. You should really try to learn from Chad. Watch how he commands a room, how he inspires confidence. It might help you in the long run. There's more to success than just being good at your job." I paused, my razor held mid-air. I met her eyes in the mirror. I saw my own calm face and, behind it, her smiling, condescending features. I just rinsed my razor, wiped my face, and turned to her. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. We drove to the office in separate cars, a routine we had started a few weeks ago as the emotional distance between us had solidified into a physical one. It felt fitting. Today, we were not just taking separate cars, we were driving toward entirely different destinations. I arrived at my desk at 8:30. the office already buzzing with the low-grade energy of the start of a new week. I didn't turn on my main monitor. I cleared out a few old files, organizing my desk with a quiet deliberation. I was a stagehand preparing the set for the final act. Across the open-plan office, I could see Tina at her workstation. She was on the phone, laughing, her body language animated and triumphant. No doubt it was Chad, the two of them sharing a final moment of giddy anticipation before their coronation. At exactly 9 a.m., a new email notification popped up on my secondary screen. A small, unassuming banner. It did on everyone's screen, throughout the entire company, on every floor, in every department. That same notification appeared. The subject line was simple, elegant in its corporate blandness. Announcement, new Director of Strategic Integration. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had already read the script. Instead, I watched Tina. I saw her end her call with a cheerful, "Talk soon," and turn to her monitor, her face alight with triumphant expectation. I watched her mouse move with confident purpose. I saw her click open the email. For a single, fleeting second, her victorious smile remained, a relic of a reality that no longer existed. Then I watched as her entire world collapsed in on itself, in silence. I saw her eyes scan the first line, the line that contained the name. The smile didn't just fade, it was wiped clean, leaving a vacuum in its place. I watched as every ounce of color drained from her face, a rapid, horrifying transformation from tanned and glowing to a pale, sickly, almost translucent white. Her mouth fell slightly open. She blinked once, twice, a slow, disbelieving motion, as if trying to reboot her own brain. She reread the email, her head tilted closer to the screen, her brow furrowed in a state of cognitive dissonance. Then she reread it again. From 50 feet away, I could see her hands begin to tremble. A subtle change began to ripple through the office. The steady rhythm of typing faltered. A low murmur started, and then died, replaced by a charged silence. Heads began to pop up over cubicle walls. People were exchanging quick, wide-eyed glances. The news was spreading. Tina slowly, mechanically, lifted her head from her monitor. Her eyes, wide and wild, scanned the room in a desperate searching pattern until they locked onto mine. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't offer a single micro-expression of triumph. I just held her gaze with a perfectly neutral, almost placid expression. The sight of me, calm, composed, and already turning back to my work as if it were just another Monday, seemed to be the final confirmation, the thing that broke her trance of disbelief and unleashed the torrent of rage that was building behind the shock. The system had failed, and she was looking at the architect. For a few heartbeats, the world seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the low hum of the office ventilation system. Then, as if a switch was flipped, Tina's shock curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. She shot up from her chair with such force that it scraped loudly against the floor and rolled back a few feet. Every head that wasn't already watching her snapped in our direction. She marched towards my desk, a heat haze of fury shimmering around her. She wasn't just walking. She was stalking, her fists clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles were white. She was a vessel of incandescent rage, and she was aimed directly at me. She stopped directly in front of my desk, her chest heaving. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, shaking thing, vibrating with a venom that was almost tangible. She gestured vaguely with a trembling hand towards her computer screen. "This is some kind of joke, right? A typo. How did you do this?" Her voice was rising in volume with each question, drawing more and more overt stares from our colleagues. "You stole this from him. From Chad." The accusation echoed in the now silent office. This was the moment, the first test. This was where the new dynamic would be forged, not in a private office, but here, in the court of public opinion. This was not a personal dispute. It was a challenge to my authority before I had even had a chance to sit in my new chair. I slowly, deliberately rose from my seat. I'm a few inches taller than her, and the simple act of standing created an immediate and undeniable shift in our physical dynamic. I looked down at her, not with anger, but with a calm, almost detached authority. I kept my voice quiet, forcing her to strain slightly to hear me. A subtle power move that also prevented the entire floor from hearing our exchange. "Tina," I said, my tone even and professional. "This is neither the time nor the place for this conversation." I glanced meaningfully at the dozens of pairs of eyes now fixed upon us. "My door is always open if you wish to schedule a meeting. However, I expect you to conduct yourself professionally in the workplace. We have a project status meeting scheduled for 10 Huang. I will see you in the main conference room then." I paused, letting the words sink in, before delivering the final, definitive blow. "At that time, we can discuss your concerns regarding the project pipeline." The color returned to her face in a hot, angry flush. She was speechless. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. She had marched over here to confront David, her weak, pathetic ex-boyfriend. She was now being addressed as Tina, a subordinate, by her new director. The personal had been surgically excised from the equation, leaving only the professional, a landscape where she had just committed a massive public blunder. She stood there for a few more seconds, sputtering, before she seemed to realize the full extent of her error. Everyone was watching her unprofessional outburst, her emotional incontinence. She turned on her heel, without another word, and stormed back to her desk, the fury of her retreat a stark contrast to the cold, quiet authority that had just put her in her place. That evening, the confrontation at the house was exactly what I expected, only louder. She was waiting for me the moment I walked in the door, a storm front of fury pacing in the living room. She unleashed everything. She accused me of being a manipulative, vindictive snake. She screamed that I had planned this all along, that I had let her humiliate herself just to twist the knife. She said I was pathetic, that this was the only way a weak man like me could ever feel powerful. I didn't interrupt. I just stood there, my briefcase still in my hand, and let her vent. I let her exhaust her rage, let the storm blow itself out until she was left panting, her voice hoarse. When she was finally finished, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I didn't do this to you, Tina. I did this for myself. You made your worldview perfectly clear last week. You laid out your entire philosophy on strength, leadership, and value." I took a step towards her. "You said you wanted an alpha, a leader, someone who takes charge. You made your choice based on your perception of strength." I stopped a few feet from her. "It seems you just backed the wrong horse." I walked past her then, into the kitchen, and took a glass from the cupboard, filling it with water from the tap. My back was to her. "You're right about one thing, though," I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet kitchen. "The dynamic has changed, and given that change, it is completely inappropriate for you to be living here anymore." I turned around, leaning against the counter, and looked at her. "This is my house. I need you to find a new place to live. You have 1 week." The fight went out of her then, as if I'd severed a cord. Her rage, her self-righteous indignation, it all evaporated, replaced by a dawning visceral horror. The reality of her situation, the full catastrophic consequences of her choices, were crashing down on her all at once. Her alpha boyfriend had failed. The promotion was lost. Her dream of being a power couple was a smoking ruin. She had publicly humiliated herself at work and was now under the direct authority of the man she despised. And now, she was losing her home. Her grand plan had not just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular and complete way imaginable. It's been 2 weeks since the announcement, 2 weeks since the world tilted on its axis. The fallout has been both predictable and, in a grimly satisfying way, illuminating. The first week was about establishing my authority, a process that Tina and Chad did not make easy. There were whispers in the hallways, subtle acts of non-compliance, and a general air of passive resistance emanating from their respective departments. They believed my promotion was a fluke, a political anomaly, and that if they applied enough pressure, the system would correct back in their favor. They fundamentally miscalculated. They tried to fight me on their terms, office politics and hearsay. I chose to fight on mine, demonstrable competence. My first official act as director was to call a mandatory summit with the heads of all departments now under my purview. This, of course, included Tina, representing her project management team, and Chad, representing sales strategy. The agenda was simple: a full top-to-bottom review of the entire active project pipeline. I wanted to identify risks, re-evaluate priorities, and establish a new strategic baseline built on reality, not fantasy. The air in the main conference room was electric with tension. Chad came in with his usual swagger, but it was brittle, like a coat of fresh paint over rotting wood. He was trying to act as if nothing had changed, as if I were still just a senior architect temporarily sitting at the head of the table. Tina took a seat at the far end, as far away from me as physically possible, her posture rigid, refusing to make eye contact. The primary topic of the meeting, the centerpiece of our project portfolio, was a major new client-facing initiative codenamed Project Ozymandias. It had been Chad's baby for months, the cornerstone of his pitch for the director role. It was a flashy, ambitious platform that promised to revolutionize our customer relationship management using AI-driven analytics. Tina had been its biggest internal supporter, ensuring her project managers prioritized it above all else. When it was Chad's turn to present, he put on his usual show. He strode to the front of the room, a charismatic commander rallying his troops. He walked us through a slick presentation filled with impressive-sounding buzzwords: hyper-personalized engagement, predictive analytics synergy, proactive customer actualization, and charts with aggressively optimistic upward curves. When he finished, he looked around the room with a confident smile, expecting the usual round of applause and deference. Instead, I spoke into the silence. "Thank you, Chad," I said, my voice even and calm. "The projections are certainly ambitious. However, I spent the weekend performing a deep-dive architectural review of the core framework required to support this strategy." I looked around the table at the other department heads, the heads of engineering, QA, and database administration. "Can you please turn to slide 17, where you outline the data integration process?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Chad's face. He fumbled with the remote for a moment before the slide came up. It was a vague flowchart with boxes labeled legacy data and cloud platform, connected by a hopeful-looking arrow. "As I see it," I continued, speaking to the entire room, "your entire strategy relies on real-time data synchronization between our legacy inventory system and the new cloud-based analytics platform. Your plan is to build a skyscraper on the foundation of a garden shed. You've sold us the view from the penthouse, but you never bothered to check the blueprints." I let the analogy hang in the air for a moment. The legacy system's API has a hard query limit of 1,000 requests per hour. Your plan, as outlined here, would require a minimum of 10,000 requests per hour during peak business times. The system as it currently exists cannot support this. It won't just be slow. It will catastrophically fail, likely taking the entire inventory system down with it. I wasn't aggressive. I wasn't emotional. I just stated facts. I presented data. I laid out the core, fatal flaw in his entire strategy, a flaw that any first-year programmer would have spotted, but which he, in his sales-focused, big-picture world, had either completely ignored or willfully concealed. The room was utterly silent. I could see the head of engineering, a man named Frank, giving a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He knew. They all knew. Chad's face went from tan to a blotchy, furious red. He had no answer. He stammered something about his technical consultants assuring him it would work. "Then your consultants were wrong," I said simply. "This initiative, as it is currently designed, represents an unacceptable risk to core business operations. We need to shelve it, pending a complete and viable architectural review. I want that viable plan on my desk in 2 weeks. A viable plan, Chad, not a PowerPoint deck." My eyes then moved to the far end of the table and settled on Tina. "Tina," I said, my voice still perfectly level, "please have your team deprioritize all resources currently allocated to Project Ozymandias. I want them moved to the Phoenix project, effective immediately. Send me the revised resource allocation chart by end of day." Tina just stared at me, her face pale. She had to sit there, in front of her peers, and publicly dismantle the very project she had championed, the one that was supposed to be her and Chad's ticket to the top. She opened her mouth, then closed it. All she could do was nod. In one 10-minute exchange, without raising my voice, I had exposed Chad's incompetence, reasserted control over the company's direction, and demonstrated to every manager in that room the new standard of leadership. It wasn't about charisma, it was about competence. The meeting in the conference room was a public execution. In the days that followed, the new order began to solidify. Chad's brittle confidence shattered completely. He became a ghost, walking the hallways with his head down, his presence in meetings reduced to a sullen silence. His sales team, who had once orbited him like planets around a sun, began to keep their distance, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of his failure. The respect I now commanded wasn't born of fear, but of results. The other department heads saw a leader who understood their challenges, who spoke their language, and who was not afraid to kill a bad project, even a high-profile one, to protect the company's resources. They saw competence, and in our world, competence is the only currency that truly matters. Their next move was an act of quiet desperation. Stripped of their professional credibility, they attempted to weaponize the personal. Tina began a whisper campaign. She started complaining to her work friends, people she used to have lunch with, about how awkward and uncomfortable I was making things. I overheard her one afternoon in the break room, her voice a carefully crafted performance of a wounded victim. She heavily implied that I was creating a hostile work environment, using my new position to punish her for our breakup. It backfired spectacularly. The people in our company, especially on the technical side, have a low tolerance for interpersonal drama and an almost religious reverence for good work. They had all seen Chad's flashy presentations and had all been forced at some point to deal with the messy reality of his flawed plans. They didn't see a vindictive ex-boyfriend flexing his newfound power. They saw a competent director cleaning house. Tina's complaints didn't garner her sympathy. They just made her look unprofessional and petty, like someone complaining about the surgeon's bedside manner while he was in the middle of removing a tumor. Then came the truly dirty trick. Defeated professionally and politically, they decided to try and attack the foundation of my entire career, my reputation as an architect. One of my old projects, a complex software update I had personally architected 2 years prior, was in its final deployment phase. It was a piece of work I was immensely proud of, an elegant and robust system that handled critical transaction processing. It was my legacy, a testament to my skills as a builder. Late one night last week, someone went into the system and altered a critical line of code. It was a subtle, malicious change. It targeted a data validation subroutine, inserting a tiny logical flaw that would allow duplicate transaction IDs to be processed under a specific, rare set of circumstances. It wouldn't cause an immediate crash. It was designed to be a ticking time bomb, a silent poison that would create a serious data corruption issue about a week down the line, once thousands of transactions had been affected. It was designed to make it look like I, David, had left a catastrophic bug in my own work right before my promotion. It was a direct, cowardly attempt to make me look incompetent to Marcus and the entire senior leadership team. It was a clumsy, desperate move. The next morning, I was reviewing the final deployment logs, a routine check. Everything looked clean, but a single metric felt off. The average processing time for the validation routine had decreased by a few nanoseconds. It was a change so infinitesimally small that any automated system would have missed it, and any other manager would have ignored it. But I knew the architecture of that system like the back of my hand. I had optimized that specific routine myself. It shouldn't have been faster. That tiny, anomalous gain in speed was like hearing a single wrong note in a symphony I had composed. It was a nagging inconsistency that I couldn't ignore. I didn't panic. I didn't even mention my suspicion to anyone. Instead, I went directly into the source code repository. I pulled up the allegedly final version of the code and compared it to my own archived master copy. And there it was. A single line of code had been altered. The logic was sloppy, an inefficient shortcut that traded integrity for a fractional speed increase. It wasn't my work. It was like finding a piece of duct tape on a load-bearing wall I had designed. My next step was to go directly to our company's cybersecurity logs. In our high-compliance industry, every single change to a production system, every single login, is tracked, timestamped, and stored. It took me less than an hour of methodical searching to find it. The unauthorized change was made at 10:47 p.m. the previous night. It was logged under a set of temporary administrative credentials that had been elevated. The meeting in the conference room was a public execution. In the days that followed, the new order began to solidify. Chad's brittle confidence shattered completely. He became a ghost, walking the hallways with his head down, his presence in meetings reduced to a sullen silence. His sales team, who had once orbited him like planets around a sun, began to keep their distance, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of his failure. The respect I now commanded wasn't born of fear, but of results. The other department heads saw a leader who understood their challenges, who spoke their language, and who was not afraid to kill. It has been 3 months since my promotion, and the final pieces of this chapter have fallen into place. The story of Chad and Tina at our company is officially over, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, efficient finality of a well-executed system purge. After discovering the undeniable evidence of sabotage, I did not confront Chad or Tina directly. That would have been messy, emotional, and unprofessional. It would have dragged the entire affair back down to the level of a personal grudge. Instead, I acted like the director they accused me of not being. I compiled my evidence into a single, dispassionate dossier. The cybersecurity logs showing the precise time and IP address of the unauthorized change, a side-by-side comparison of the original, elegant code versus the altered, malicious code, and a brief, factual summary of the potential 7-figure damage the data corruption would have caused. Then, I scheduled a meeting with my boss, Marcus, and the head of human resources. I laid the evidence out on the polished conference table, calmly and objectively. I didn't frame it as a personal attack. I framed it as a serious and deliberate breach of corporate security and professional ethics. An employee in a senior role, I told them, my voice level, actively attempted to sabotage a critical company project, to damage the company and discredit a director. This represents a massive and unacceptable risk to our business. The reaction was exactly what you would expect from a major corporation facing a clear and present insider threat. The corporate immune system kicked in. HR launched a full, formal investigation immediately, but it was a mere formality. Given the digital evidence, it was an open and shut case. Chad was called into a meeting with HR and 2 members of the company's legal team. He apparently tried to deny it at first, to deploy his trademark charisma as a smokescreen. But charisma is useless against server logs. When they presented him with the time-stamped records tracing the action directly to his workstation at a time when security footage showed him alone in the building, his story completely fell apart. He was terminated for cause, effective immediately. He was escorted from the building by security within the hour, carrying his belongings in a sad brown cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate exile. Being fired for gross misconduct is a black mark on a career, a stain that modern background checks make almost impossible to wash away. The investigation naturally led to Tina. While there was no direct proof that she participated in the sabotage, her known romantic and professional alliance with Chad, her public outburst on the day of my promotion, and her documented complaints to colleagues about me creating a hostile environment painted a very clear picture. She was found to be a key part of a pattern of unprofessional behavior that was contributing to a toxic work atmosphere. They didn't fire her. Her fate, in a way, was almost worse. She was given a final written warning and was laterally transferred to a different division, a bureaucratic backwater of the company that handles legacy account maintenance. Her project manager title remained, but the projects were meaningless, endless cycles of paperwork for accounts that had been dormant for years. It was a professional prison, a place where careers went to die. She was stripped of any influence or prestige, her ambitions permanently stalled. The power couple was finished. Chad was unemployed and disgraced. Tina was sidelined and humiliated. The grapevine, as it always does, filled in the rest. Chad is reportedly still struggling to find a new position. The story of why he left our company, a story of sabotage and gross misconduct, has of course made the rounds in our tight-knit industry. Tina lasted another month in her new role, a ghost haunting the hallways of a career that was already over. She couldn't handle the daily, quiet humiliation of her demotion, or the looks from former colleagues who knew the whole story. She quietly resigned. The last I heard, she had moved back in with her parents in a different state. As for me, I'm thriving. My department is running more efficiently than ever. We've successfully launched 2 major projects, including the Phoenix project, under budget and ahead of schedule. The team's morale is the highest it's been in years, because they are led by someone who understands their work and respects their expertise. The respect I get from my colleagues isn't demanded. It's earned, not through loud talk or empty charisma, but through steady leadership and proven results. My work speaks for itself. Looking back on it all from the quiet of my new office, Tina was right about one thing. She said she needed an alpha. But her idea of what that meant was a cheap, superficial caricature. She was drawn to the loudest, peacock in the room, the one with the flashiest display, mistaking his bravado for strength and his arrogance for ambition. She failed to understand that real strength, real leadership, isn't about the noise you make or the attention you command. It's about the foundations you build. It's about the problems you solve, the systems you create, and the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing, with absolute certainty, that you are competent and in control of your own destiny. She went looking for her alpha, and in the end, she found one. She just never realized it was the man she was leaving behind.